Any devout person would describe their God as utterly perfect and not capable of making mistakes. So when this God created mankind, it can be assumed that he did so on the first try and didn't have any sort of prototypes or test dummy versions. This is unlike other mythologies, most notably the Greeks, wherein perhaps the more popular myth, Prometheus and his brother Epimetheus are seen to create an imperfect humanity who lack all the abilities of the wild beasts, and therefore require the gift of fire. In another Greek myth, the gods are seen to create men not at all unlike the biblical God, where they create a godlike golden race that were pure and without sorrow of heart, kind of like Adam and Eve before the fall. Unlike the biblical God though, the Greek gods aren't content with how they've made man, and proceed to experiment with other metals, making a silver race, then a brass race, and finally an iron race, believed in some interpretations to be us. Each iteration appears to be worse than the one that came before it, which is perhaps reflective of the human characteristics often associated with the Greek gods. The biblical God, by comparison, doesn't need iterations. He doesn't need test runs or practice molds. He simply makes humanity perfectly, or at least as perfect as it can be, on the first try. A Jewish legend I've come across though appears to entertain the idea that what if we weren't the first attempt? What if God had made a practice run of creating humanity? What if God had made drafts of mankind that he didn't particularly like? What if there was a race before the human race? One that, by the accounts from these Jewish legends, sound dreadfully unsettling. According to author Howard Schwartz in his work The Tree of Souls, a compendium of Jewish legends, Adam wasn't the first man, but rather God had created something far more disturbing and perhaps even abominable. Schwartz notes that there is little record remaining of such creatures, but that there were early attempts at humanity by God that, after having been formed and allowed to roam the earth, were destroyed and made extinct. These creatures were called Adne Sadeh, creatures that, whilst resembled man, had some key, rather disturbing differences. One of the main characteristics of the Adne Sadeh was that they were made with a cord attached to their navels that then also connected to the earth. The cord was said to grow up to more than the length of a mile, allowing the being to traverse longer distances in search of sustenance. But nevertheless, they were still limited by the reach of the cord. In fact, Schwartz tells us that if the cord was cut, then the Adne Sadeh would immediately die. Indeed, the creature depended on the cord remaining attached to the earth, and whilst it didn't seem to feed on the earth via the cord, considering it is noted that it would search for fruits and vegetables within its allowed radius, the attachment was still seen to be necessary. The account here also tells us that occasionally it would lure animals that wandered too close to it, and that so long as the animals did not flee out of its limited reach, it would catch them and eat them. The lifespan of the Adne Sadeh is also described as being very long, perhaps even longer than what the average human could expect. Although considering biblical ages in the times before the flood, this might make narrative sense for an early human. Schwartz hints at the versatility and formidability of the Adne Sadeh, remarking that, short of the flood, or other disasters, there was little that could take the early human's life, unless its cord was snapped. Naturally, the Bible never mentions anything of the sort, but quite like the Nephilim described in chapter 6 of Genesis, there is an idea, also confirmed by Schwartz, that the Adne Sadeh would have perished during the events of the biblical flood. Indeed, even if these creatures could swim, they could only swim as far as their individual cords would allow. While Schwartz provides the term Adne Sadeh to describe this primitive man, a modern scholarly commentary on the Mishnah, Mishnat Eretz Yisrael to be specific, describes these beings as Adnai Hasada, men of the field, or simply wild men, whom the ancients believed were inhabiting the land at some point. This then suggests that these creatures were not eliminated during the flood, given that they were noted as being present in this account. Rabbi Louis Ginzburg, in his work Legends of the Jews, also speaks of the Adne Sadeh, though refers to the creature as an individual being, as opposed to a species, and as something of a precursor for Adam. This being he described as the Man of the Mountains, and that his form is exactly that of a human being, but he is fastened to the ground by means of a navel string, upon which his life depends. The cord once snapped, he dies. This animal keeps himself alive with what is produced by the soil around about him, as far as his tether permits him to crawl. No creature may venture to approach within the radius of his cord, for he seizes and demolishes whatever comes in his reach. What's interesting here is that he describes Adne Sadeh not as a human, but in fact as an animal, which, not only has the effect of dehumanizing him, but also illustrates him in the image akin to Bigfoot or the Sasquatch, a being whose supposed anthropomorphic traits make for quite the fascinating case study. He's also more descriptive than Schwartz's narrative, where he paints the creature in a much more violent light, suggesting that should one come in reach of it, it would be quick to resort to hostility. Ginzberg continues, "To kill him, one may not go near him. The navel string must be severed from a distance by means of a dart, and then he dies amid groans and moans." Ginzberg also tells us of a story where a traveller happened to come upon the region where Adne Sadeh was said to roam. The traveller, who was travelling with his wife, overheard their host explaining that they meant to serve the man for dinner. Fearing that he'd fallen in with cannibals, the traveller appeared to ditch his wife and fled from the host as fast as his feet could carry him. Later on, he discovered that the host had no intention of feeding them with human meat, but rather the flesh of the animal being, the Adne Sadeh, that they happened to call man. Whether or not these people were harvesting meat off of this creature, or whether they meant to hunt it and eat it as sort of a one-time meal, is not clear. Ginzberg makes no effort to conclude the story either, but merely tells us of the creature, as the Man of the Mountain is fixed to the ground by his navel string, so the barnacle goose is grown to a tree by its bill. It is hard to say whether it is an animal and must be slaughtered to be fit for food, or whether it is a plant and no ritual ceremony is necessary before eating it. Whilst it remains unclear where this legend of Adne Sadeh stemmed from, it is seen to crop up in a late 19th century historical study called The Vegetable Lamb of Tartay by English naturalist Henry Lee, who happened to shed some light on it. He noted that in the Jerusalem Talmud, it is stated that a being of the mountains lived by means of its navel, which immediately gives us the image of our Adne Sadeh. He continues that a Rabbi Meir argued that this was an animal named Jadua, which could be conflated with a fedui mentioned in scripture, that in later Jewish rabbinic tradition connects to the biblical term Yiddenai, mentioned in Leviticus 19:31, that which usually meant a medium or necromancer. Here Lee suggests that this mysterious being called the Yedua, or again the Adnai HaSadeh, the Lords of the Field, can be conflated with a strange plant-animal hybrid that possessed bones believed to have magical or divinatory properties. Here Lee describes how some historical traditions link this creature to the biblical prohibition against consulting spirits, suggesting that its remains were thought to be used in occult practices. He continued, "A king of large stem issues from a root in the earth on which this animal, called fedua, grows, just as gourds and melons. Only the fedua has in all respects a human shape, in face, body, hands and feet." The remainder of his description begins to match up closely with the likes of Schwartz and Ginzberg's accounts, where we are told that it has a stem descending from its navel that connects to the earth, and that no creature can approach it without being seized and killed by it. it. What's more, within the tether of its stem, it devours all the herbage and vegetation around. Interestingly, he then supplies us with a workaround that man can use to hunt the creature, that they must not approach its person, but rather tear at the stem of its cord until it is ruptured. There, the animal would die. It certainly isn't the most streamlined of Jewish legends that we've discussed on this channel. Not only does it diminish the scriptural idea that God created man perfectly, but it proves to be inconsistent with the rest of the biblical narrative. Indeed, even if God had created this unnerving being as a precursor for Adam, it makes no sense how or why it would then survive the deluge. Its very design is also pretty flawed, given that it's tethered to a specific region, and the fact that it can be felled by merely cutting its cord, especially when the cord seems to serve no function, kind of makes its whole existence laughably cruel. While such a legend became incongruent with traditional belief, it does beg the question why this was even a thing, and why the ancient Jews who first thought up this creature, this prototype to Adam, would make something so mindlessly violent and physically impaired. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.